I'm Emily Rooney. Welcome to Beat the Press. Our topics: do they matter? Media endorsements and last-minute polls. John Henry's big week. He tells readers why he bought the Globe and wins another World Series. The Wall Street Journal lets actress Suzanne Summers pen a nutty op-ed. And our panel rants and raves of the week. Joining me are Dan Kennedy of Northeastern University, WGBH's Callie Crossley, Marjorie Egan, also of WGBH and the Boston Herald, and Josh Benton of the Neiman Journalism Lab. First, another election, another chance to ask whether anybody really cares about newspaper endorsements. If they do, John Connolly is in luck. This week, the Boston Globe and Boston Herald both endorsed him in the Boston mayor's race. But if recent history is any indication, those nods may not make a whit of difference. Adam Riley has more.
The Boston Globe says John Connolly should be the city's next mayor, arguing that his vision and independence set him apart from Marty Walsh. The Boston Herald agrees, calling Connolly the clear choice. But if you think those endorsements left the Walsh camp feeling glum, think again.
We did it! We did it!
Back in September, Walsh won the mayoral preliminary despite the Globe backing Connolly and John Barrows, and the Herald actually urging readers to reject Walsh. And that's not the only evidence that endorsements aren't all they're cracked up to be. The New York Times endorsed Christine Quinn in that city's Democratic mayoral primary, but she finished a distant third. Closer to home, Dan Winslow was endorsed by the Globe, the Herald, and a bevy of other papers in his U.S. Senate run, only to finish last in the GOP primary. And let's not forget the Globe's endorsement of Martha Coakley back in 2010. That didn't work either.
This is the people's seat.
But maybe we're looking in the wrong place. If the press does tip the scales, it might be by publishing last-minute polls. Case in point, recent surveys that show Walsh pulling ahead of Connolly. They're snapshots, but potentially self-fulfilling.
I'm not sure either one of these is going to make a difference. A poll, is that going to tell people that's who they should vote for, or they should go the other way if they want to make a difference? They could go either way on that. On the endorsements, I think it's always interesting to read the editorial positions of newspapers. So I enjoy it for that reason. But do you think anybody actually goes to the polls and they go, I wonder what the Bay State Banner thought of this, or the Boston Herald, or the Boston Globe? I doubt it sincerely, but I think it's information for readers, and it's a really well-informed editorial board for the most cases on all of these newspapers, and it gives you information about what they think.
You know, if our viewers find that I've said exactly the same thing before, then so be it. But I've written a lot of endorsements over the years. I never labored under any illusions that people were using them as a voting guide. But I think they can matter a great deal for smaller races. I think that for races like president, senator, even mayor of Boston, people are able to make up their minds without the guidance of the Globe or the Herald or anybody else. But, if you're talking about a big city council field, if you have a trusted source of information, I'd rip that editorial out of the paper and bring it with me into the voting booth. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've used them. I've used them particularly in Brookline, where I live, where I don't really know that much about what's going on. And so I absolutely look at what the tab says about candidates. And the Globe is a more liberal paper. The Herald is a more conservative paper. So if you're the more conservative person, you might look at what the Herald says. They're all these very reasoned arguments about why they endorse a certain candidate. And the same thing with the Globe if you're a more liberal person. So they may not influence the readers, but I think it's a great service to readers. As you said, you have a board of people that knows what they're talking about, that studies the issues, that gives you A, B, C, and D, why they support a certain person. I think they're great. And as for the polls, I have no problem with polls through, like today, for the mayoral race. We had a Suffolk Herald poll today on the mayoral race. I have a real problem with, like, Sunday. I don't think you want to do those polls on Sunday. But again, this is a close race. I mean, I think if you see the polls show the race is close, more incentive for people to get off their duffs and go out and vote on Tuesday in Boston. I hope lots of people do.
it's because the race is close that some endorsements do matter. Now, the question is, do newspaper endorsements matter? I just had my regular sit-down with my Cambridge neighbor as we went over all of the flyers and everything to make decisions.
You do that every year, don't you?
I do that every year, and we are looking for the endorsements. In fact, I had just said, where are some of the endorsements that I'm accustomed to seeing for some of the people? She said, I think some of those organizations don't do it again. So it really matters in a close race, and this is a close race.
You sit down with your neighbor?
Absolutely.
That is
and we have
impressive.
And we go over everything and discuss, who's backing who and what votes they took and why, and we have those discussions. And she said to me this morning, in a close race, we didn't know we were talking about this. In a close race, I'm going to look at the newspaper endorsement. And she said, and she talked to her neighbor, and the same thing was true. She said, I don't know, I'm kind of like this, so I think I'll go with where the newspaper went. So I do think it can make a difference in that way. Those personal endorsements where the people have, stood up, and in this race for mayor, I think it's more interesting that a lot of people who didn't like either of those candidates are now on their side, supporting them. That has a lot of weight for me as a voter if I were looking at that if I lived in Boston. So I think that endorsements can matter and that newspaper endorsements can matter, but close to the race, that's what it counts, I think, maybe.
Yeah, there's been some interesting research on what makes a newspaper's endorsement effective. It does work better in down-ticket races where people might not have as much information about the individual candidates. It works, they can be more effective in cities where it's all Democrats or all Republicans. You don't have the party ability to say which way you're going. There was a great study on the 2000 election, Bush versus Gore, and they found that if it was a paper that was expected to make an endorsement, it had no impact. The New York Times endorsing Al Gore didn't change anybody's mind because that was expected. The Dallas Morning News supporting George Bush didn't move anyone's votes. But they found that the Denver Post, which was leaned in one direction, instead endorsed Al Gore, and that moves about 3% of the vote in Colorado, this study found. So in some cases, when it's surprising, it can be effective. In this case, given that both papers in Boston had endorsed Connolly in the preliminary, I don't think anyone was surprised by the fact that they would do it again, so I doubt that these are going to move votes one bit.
Do you think any times, is there a cutoff where it's too late to publish a poll? Marjorie thinks Friday before Election Day.
I agree with that.
Is there
I think that's
Sunday, Friday? What the
that's
heck?
probably a decent practice. I sincerely doubt that it makes a big difference. Particularly, polling. I think people have realized it's not always accurate.
Yeah.
When you have a margin of error, it's not unusual to expect that things might be 3 points off or 4 points.
See,
off.
but it's not about the poll. It's about the coverage of the poll.
Yeah.
So, so I agree with Marjorie. If it's Sunday, the coverage is going to be, oh well, so and so is winning, and that's all you hear, right, as you go into the voting booth. Yeah. So I think that's not right.